Okay, welcome everybody. So this is indeed the monthly evening program of Los Angeles Audubon Society, which we went online a couple of years ago, and we're staying here because it's so exciting to get people to be able to get together without the friction of traffic. It also means I don't have to explain where the restrooms are because you know. And so I did want to just say that if you got notice of this on Facebook, great. I apologize, those of you who did, because I originally put 7:30 a.m. instead of 7:30 p.m. and then Facebook didn't let me change it. I tried to clear that up, but if you're here, great. We also have a mailing list. If you would like to be on it and aren't, you can go to our website, which is laaudubon.org. And at the bottom of every single page is a section that says subscribe. Just go ahead and pop your email in there and sign up. You'll get notice of these. And on that website as well, we have an events calendar. So, for example, our in-person events like open wetlands at the Biono Wetlands on the first Sunday and second Saturday of every month. These programs are on there. This Saturday we have a bird walk at Kenneth Hahn State Recreation Area and a bilingual bird walk at the South LA Wetlands Park with Brad Rumble. And next month, we don't have our introductory bird walk this month because of the holiday, but next month we do out at Will Rogers on the 15th of May. So check out the website on the events calendar to be apprised and get on the mailing list. So tonight, I want to welcome um, Amy Collins, Dr. Amy Collins. Is that you who shared your screen now, Amy?
No.
Oh, okay.
Can't let me.
Mystery. Yeah, maybe we should let you do that.
Yeah.
Dr. Amy Collins. So I have done some work with her. She was at UC Davis. She is a postdoctoral research scholar at Colorado State University in the Aero Ecology Lab, so the above the ground ecology lab, or off the ground, I guess I should say. And originally from the United Kingdom, she moved to California in 2015 to work on her PhD at Davis. And before that, she got her Master's Science at Imperial College London and her Bachelor Science at University of Leeds, and has worked for the Zoological Society of London and as a zoology consultant for Discovery Channel TV, which is, we'll ask you about if we get late into the evening and no one wants to. I'm very curious what behind the scenes stories there are there. But this is a topic, those of you who know me know that this is a topic near and dear to my heart, light pollution and its effects on ecosystems, and also one that we have the possibility to do some action on here in Los Angeles County. And I'll mention this after the talk, but the Los Angeles Astronomical Society is spearheading an effort to try to upgrade, enforce, and generally improve the light pollution ordinance for portions of Los Angeles County, some of the rural portions, and we're supporting that, and it gives us a sort of an actionable thing to go along with learning a bit here about bird migration and the effects of urban centers. So thank you for coming, and thank Amy for being willing to join us here and present, and take it away.
Thanks so much, Travis. Hi, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Okay, here we go. I'm going to test this, see how this goes. Great. Okay. So, to get things started, Travis kind of just mentioned a little bit about me, but yeah, so I am Amy Collins. I'm sort of going to talk to you a bit about some research and conservation that has interested me in the last several years. So a bit of background about me. I grew up in an English town, sort of an hour north of London, and after college, I lived in London for several years. And I became really interested in urban centres and sort of human-wildlife coexistence. And so I moved to California Davis, where I did my PhD in 2015. And there, part of my work was studying the effects of light pollution on mammals, specifically mobile sources of light pollution, and how that affects the ability of wildlife to use crossing structures. And a big part of that project was working in LA. So I had a lot of sites down in LA, and you can see this picture on the bottom left is myself sampling along the I-5, and I'm actually taking some noise pollution measurements. And that picture is actually with Travis's camera. So you can see the sort of fisheye lens approach. And so a large part of my work was taking sound measurements and light measurements along highways to look at those impacts on the wildlife. And then from that work, I did provide just a bit of recommendations for the Liberty Canyon overpass, which some of you might be familiar with. So, excuse me. So, yeah, so I sort of have a deep connection to LA, and I'm sort of really thrilled that Travis invited me along tonight, because obviously, as well as my connection to LA, I am now it's sort of perfect timing that I'm giving this talk, because I've now shifted gears to looking at and addressing some issues associated with light pollution in the context of bird movement and migration. So, as Travis said, I'm a postdoc at CSU's Aeroecology Lab, and part of that work at Colorado State University is also with the SALET team. So the SALET team is Sound and Light Ecology team, and that's a collaboration between some researchers at CSU and the National Park Service, the Natural Sounds and Night Skies Division, which headquarters is in Fort Collins. So I'm coming to you live from Fort Collins right now. So that's sort of a bit about me, and the journey I want to take you on tonight is sort of looking at light pollution, getting a grasp of what that is, and its effects on birds, in particular migration. I'm going to talk a little bit about the study that I'm currently working on to measure bird migration and light impacts, and then what you and I can do to help birds sort of complete their migratory routes and have safe passage through urban centres. So light pollution is ubiquitous across the globe. 23% of globe's landmass is actually affected by what we call sky glow. Sky glow is sort of a measure of light pollution absent the moon and stars. And in some areas, this light pollution is on the rise. This map is actually of black marble data, so it's a satellite data image. And they've sort of, to develop this, NASA created a 2012 to 2016 sort of composite image. And the purple areas in this image demonstrate areas where we're seeing an increase in that time between 2012 to 2016, an increase in light pollution. And the orange areas are where we're seeing a decrease. And what this data is telling us is that globally, there is an increase of about 2% each year between those years. And that increase is continuing. So 83% of people live under light polluted conditions, and this is definitely affecting us here in America too. The Milky Way is hidden from about 80% of Americans, so that's 4 in 5 people on this call don't see the Milky Way from their outside door, and that pushes a lot of us into this sort of, so this 1 to 9 scale is what's called the Bortle scale. It's sort of 9 levels of night sky brightness, and that means a lot of us are in this sort of 7 to 9 category. And And so finding areas of pristine skies in America is really challenging, and for a lot of us is not a reality. And the research community is definitely aware of this, and it's become a really pressing topic, an area of concern. This figure is just to demonstrate the level of increase in research interest into light pollution. I sort of drew a line across those bars there just to demonstrate the sheer increase in volume of papers being published on light pollution. So this was from 2000, we're seeing 3 papers, to 2016, 147. So there's definitely very much an increase in awareness and interest and concern about light pollution, both in humans and wildlife. And in terms of how light pollution is impacting birds, there are a lot of studies showing a lot of effects on birds, and I've just listed a few here for you. So, for example, dawn and dusk singing time has been shown to shift from light pollution. Birds are deprived of sleep, which can then lead to actually an increased susceptibility in disease such as West Nile virus. We're also seeing decreases, a linear decrease with taxonomic species richness, decreases in phylogenetic diversity in brightly lit areas. And as a movement ecologist, I'm interested in how the light pollution is affecting bird migration. And a lot of people have slightly different terminologies for light pollution. I'm going to call it light pollution in this talk, but you might have also heard of ALAN, or artificial light at night. But for the purposes of this, I'm going to call it light pollution. So how, you might be asking the question, how does light pollution affect bird migration? Most birds are active in the day. What light pollution occurs at night? What is going on here? Well, most songbirds actually migrate at night. So in the US, 70% of birds migrate, and of that 70%, 80% do this at nighttime. So that puts them at direct sort of exposure to light pollution in terms of their 24-hour diel cycle. And the sort of reasoning for why a lot of birds migrate at night, it's sort of an active area of research. I've just listed here a few theories or possible reasons for why songbirds are migrating at night, why it's sort of evolutionarily adaptive. So potentially it's cooler at night, so there could be sort of thermodynamic, thermoregulation reasoning behind migrating at nighttime. Another plausible theory could be that we're seeing a lot of birds of prey using thermals, and so are active in the day, and so perhaps during these long migratory routes you might want to do migration at nighttime instead as a predator avoidance strategy. And there's also been research, and this is an area of active research, but there's sort of the star map and moon are used as navigational tools, and so obviously those are visible at night. So those are sort of reasons why we're seeing a lot of birds migrating at night, doing their sort of fall and spring migration at nighttime. So if we have this sort of overlap of birds and light pollution, why is this a problem then? What is the effect of light pollution on bird migration? And I think birds exhibit a really interesting response to light pollution when migrating. And we can think of this at 2 different scales. So the first is sort of the coarse scale. in general, birds are actually attracted to bright cities. So as they're sort of moving for the spring and fall migration, we are potentially seeing an attraction at that broad scale where birds are moving into cities. And this could be problematic for birds. For example, that puts them at greater risk of exposure to tall buildings, which could lead to bird window collisions. It also puts them in areas of greater numbers of novel predators, such as domestic cats. And then this sort of attraction phenomena also is occurring. There's sort of evidence that it's occurring at the fine scale as well. So, for example, this picture on the right here is the 9/11 tribute in light in New York, and all of those sort of white lines, those are actually birds. And what they're doing is this circling behavior around those light beacons. And so at the fine scale as well, we see birds exhibit this circular behavior, which can lead to exhaustion, which for the migratory period of their life cycle is a serious problem, because they're already energetically depleted, and this could cause a real issue for birds. And again, at the fine scale, we could also be increasing the risk of birds colliding with buildings that are lit. So my research is addressing that sort of first coarse scale attraction to bright cities, and trying to sort of pinpoint, so I guess I have two goals of my research that I can share with you. So the first is to create a US Atlas of bird stopover activity. So we actually don't have that yet, and so being able to get a sort of contiguous US perspective of what the broad scale movement patterns are of birds within a spring and fall migratory season. And then on top of that, we can then look at this light pollution in a bit more detail and identify whether light pollution is a driver of the bird stopover activity, if birds are actually being attracted to these urban centres. And a couple of sort of examples of covariates we can look at. On the left is VIIRS. VIIRS is a satellite, and it's this is demonstrating light pollution or upward radiance, and that is a movie of, I think it's 2016 to 2020. And then on the right is what we call NDVI, which is Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, or in other words, greenness. And that video is changed throughout the year of 2016. And so we can quantify those metrics and then do some fancy modeling and identify the predictive capacity of these types of drivers on bird migration. So how do we develop that US Atlas of bird stopover activity? How do we track migration? So I'm gonna describe some methods that ornithologists have historically used to track a journey of a bird. So we have a couple of examples here. I've just taken this from the British Trust for Ornithology. So metal rings and colour marks, some of you on this call, on this Zoom might have banded yourselves, and so we can track bird locations by sort of mark recapture abilities. We also have remote tracking with a bit of technological advancement. So the first bird to be remotely tracked using satellites was in 1989, and since then we've sort of seen this boom in technology and methods we can use to track these birds and their journeys remotely. And so we have geolocators here. These are really small and light. They're sort of 1/3 of a gram. And those geolocators actually use light levels to estimate location, which is really interesting. And then a couple of other sort of technologies that we can tap into. We have satellite tags. That's a network of satellites that sort of sends a signal to ground stations called Argos. And from that, you can calculate the position of the tag. And it sort of gives you an instant location opportunity every time a satellite passes. And then, of course, we have the GPS, very high precision, sort of a gram upward. And then we have community science tools such as eBird. So these are really great tools that tap into communities like this one, which sort of take advantage of birders who are recording their locations. And it's kind of a win-win, because when you're birding, it's a great way to store your records for observing birds. And then on the research side, you can compile that data and make inferences about species-specific migratory routes. So what we know from this plethora of technology and this information is quite a bit already. We obviously know there are certain flyways. We have an ability to see certain migratory paths of certain species now. So this is that barn swallow migratory route is developed from some modeling done by staff at eBird. We also know fun facts like there are over 520 species that migrate through LA and San Diego County. I found that out, and that just blew my mind. That's incredible. So we know those facts because of these great tools that we can sort of monitor birds. And then we also can sort of tap into that data to start sort of uncovering this question about light pollution. And there's this great paper in I believe 2017 that actually took 40 species of eBird data and compared the seasonal richness to urban light pollution, and they found an association, a positive association. So we're seeing evidence that light pollution at this broad scale is having an attraction. But there's one other tool we can add to this already awesome toolkit, and this is where I come in. So weather radar data. So these, don't worry too much about the acronyms. Those are just individual names for all of these stations. But this is the network of weather radar stations that span the US. And this is how we get our weather reports, weather forecasts. And I zoomed in on the KSOX, that is in the Santa Ana Mountains. So that's the one covering your region. And basically what these weather radar stations do is they produce this. So this is sort of your Friday weather outlook of your typical weather forecast. But what I want you to do is sort of imagine that blue to red scale, instead of temperature, is actually bird density. And that's essentially what I do. So I sort of flip the script, and instead of, so most meteorologists, they will filter out the biotic matter, the birds and the bats from their data, and then create forecasts of weather. I and my colleagues in the aeroecology lab, we do the opposite. So we take the data that is collected from those weather radar stations, and that is sort of, if you imagine, I'll just pivot back. If you imagine that that station in the bottom left, it sends out wavelengths of energy, and it sort of scans in this 360-degree rotation. And when that a beam hits something, that then sends a message, the signal back, saying that it's hit something. And so we can collect that information and build up an image of things that are in the airspace. And so we can filter out weather to then provide something like this. So this is bird reflectivity data produced. It's actually a composite of 2016 to 2020 for spring. So that's March 15th to June 15th. And so all of those locations are the weather radar station's data, and I've created a composite image, and that's from 0 to 500, and we call it reflectivity. And you can see some of the pizza slices sort of missing from those circles, and that is some beam blockage that we've removed. So sometimes we have a mountain in the way that we have to then take a chunk of the data out. There are also other patterns in here. So you can sort of see in some of those southern sites, I've actually removed some bat roosts, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that later on. But you can see there's sort of higher values, particularly coming in around Texas. That's quite that is what we would expect. That is quite a nice landing area for birds that are coming up from the Gulf, and so we tend to see quite a lot of activity there, and then sort of up through the Mississippi Flyway, along the Pacific as well. And again, I've pulled out the KSOX for context to see where you folks are in the reflectivity metric. And so with this data, this is really informative, but we can take this one step further, and I had to throw a cat gif in here, and we can predict in the space, in that sort of fill in the gaps for the rest of the contiguous US. So fill in those sort of white areas to get a full US scale picture of prediction of avian stopover locations. And so what I'm going to show you next is preliminary data. So this is data from our first iteration of our model run. We do have models running right now for our second iteration for a couple of things that we've tweaked, but this is what we produced for our first round. And so on the left, we have spring avian stopover location for 2020, and then on the right, we have fall. And again, that's measured reflectivity. And again, some trends that we would expect. The mountainous regions are sort of lower in reflectivity. We're also seeing, interestingly, the band that you see, that circular band at the bottom down in Texas, that is actually a really epically huge bat roost that we have since filtered out. So that will be removed in the second iteration. But yeah, so this is sort of a picture of really a countrywide scale of avian stopover, and each of those pixels is a kilometer in scale, which is pretty good for this level of data. Very computationally intensive for that level. It's a lot of pixels. And so I mentioned earlier, we were then interested in understanding the effects of certain drivers of avian stopover. And so I want to share a couple of predictors that did emerge in our first iteration of our model. So this is sort of somewhat unsurprisingly, but deciduous forest and that sort of riparian corridor are drivers is emerging as a driver of migration. And so I've sort of zoomed in on the Missouri region there, and you can see that the image of the deciduous forest and the stopover density is quite mirrors each other. So that lighter orange is greater levels of reflectivity there. And really interestingly, light pollution also emerged as a predictor. And for the light pollution folks out there, this was VIIRS image data that we used. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But this, so this is zoomed in on Mississippi, and you can see this is just to demonstrate, again, that sort of correlation with light and stopover density. So that top left, very light colored pinpoint on that stopover density also mirrors that higher light, brightly lit area in that same picture. So there's definitely seems to be some correlations. As I said, we're running our second iteration, so stay tuned. We will be releasing the results in a publication, but also online on a dashboard once we have the atlas for 2020. So, and I would love to share with you folks on Facebook when that gets released. And the second iteration, as I mentioned, we have filtered out the bat roosts. So bat roosts are kind of, I think they're fascinating on our radar imagery because you can sort of see in the top left. I wonder if I can you guys see my mouse if I do that? Yeah, okay. So you can see these sort of circular patterns in this image here. So there's a circle here, and then sort of one over here, and I believe one there too. And that is bats emerging from a roost, and they create these sort of donut shapes every night because they sort of flock roughly the same time each night in the same location in this similar donut pattern. And so we can very quickly identify the locations of where these bat roosts are. And so I went through the region of the range of the free-tailed bat and screened out those bat areas. So now we can confidently say that the model moving forward is bird stopover density. We also made improvements to the light pollution metric. I mentioned earlier we sort of used the VIIRS satellite upward radiance metric, but to get a metric that sort of represents a bird's eye view of light pollution, I worked with Sharon Anderson in the National Park Service and folks over there to create a simplified all-sky light pollution ratio. And so that is a sort of a metric that we can use that, like I said, represents what interpretation the birds are likely to visualize the light pollution as. And the ratio, it sort of expresses a ratio of natural condition. So we have that baseline, and then we can say what is the added light pollution in that area. And so that on the bottom there is depicting that. And so, as I said, we'll be uploading those results shortly. So I sort of have demonstrated evidence of this coarse scale attraction that we're witnessing, but we can also use the radar to, excuse me, to see evidence of that fine scale attraction, the sort of localized attraction to light pollution. And so, talking about this 9/11 tribute of lights again. My colleagues, Ben Van Doren and Kyle Horton at Doctor and Farnsworth, published a paper in 2017 that wanted to address and sort of quantify that circling and that presence of birds in the area where the tribute and light is. And so on the using the radar data that I just sort of described to you, you can see the sort of pixelated image there. That is where the tribute in light is at 10:12 p.m. on September 11th, 2015. And at that moment, the lights are off, and there are approximately 500 birds within a 0.5 kilometer area around the tribute in light. Fast forward 20 minutes, and the tribute memorial has been switched on, and so the lights are now on, and we see this really stark increase in number of birds in that area. So the number of birds go up to 15,700 within 0.5 kilometers. So we have a quantifiable number to assign to that level of attraction that is being demonstrated by that tribute light. And folks then took this information and have since sort of working with the people on the ground who manage the tribute and light to better accommodate this bird behavior. Okay, so I hope I've sort of demonstrated that there are these sort of fine and coarse scale effects that light pollution is having on migration. But the question really is, what can you do? What can I do? What can you do? What can we all do to create sort of a safe passage for these birds as they migrate, as they conduct their spring and fall migration? And I realized I was really low on bird pictures, so I put bird pictures in at this point. The problem with studying all the birds. Okay, so how can we help this American goldfinch out? So the first thing we can do, the thing you can do, is turn your lights off at night. And this seems a very arbitrary statement. When am I supposed to turn the lights off? Is there certain times of the year, certain times of day? Like, when is ideal to do this? These are justifiable questions, and luckily for us, folks in my lab have developed something called Birdcast. So this is a bird migration forecast tool that provides forecasts up to 3 days in advance using the weather radar station data that I showed you earlier. And it tells us which nights have high, medium, low, or no migration intensity. And so we can, as users, as birders, we can use this to know when to prioritize going out for bird watching. I think that was one of the initial uses of it, but we can also use it to know when to prioritize, like I said, switching lights off and making safe passage possible for these birds. And so this tool, you can go onto birdcast.info and then find this type of map. You can also actually select by location. So I've typed in LA, so tonight's migration forecast is medium. And so the migration alert occurs when that number hits a high threshold. So when we have high birds per kilometer per night, we'll have that migration alert. And I believe you can sign up to get notifications through email for that as well. So you can get a migration forecast and know when to prioritize turning your lights off at night. And this turning lights off idea has really created a number of great opportunities that Audubon and partners have gotten involved with and established. So in 1999, Audubon and partners first established the Chicago Lights Out program. And now that network has grown tremendously. So we now have 44 cities and 7 regions involved in the Lights Out programs. And I would encourage you to check out that webpage, audubon.org Lights Out program. And there you can find out information about the cities and regions programs. There is information on the San Francisco Lights Out program. So they have flyers and posters and information about their program. And I took this news snippet because I think it's really evident that this Lights Out program is gaining attention at the state level. And so Governor Cuomo in New York recently announced a Lights Out program to protect migratory birds. So this isn't even for human health, which light pollution does have effects on humans. But this is targeted at migratory birds, which is a really great win for, like I said, trying to create safe passage for bird migration. And Colorado, I believe last week, also announced a Lights Out mandate for the city during April. So we're seeing this sort of political action occurring at the state level for these Lights Out programs, which is really fantastic. And you can also, on that Lights Out program webpage, they also have, Audubon has information, sample letters to elected officials and building managers as well. So if you did want to write one of those that has that material, if you wanted to get involved in some policy. And then I would also recommend warm coloured lighting. Light that is warmer, light that is in the sort of blue end of the spectrum tends to be not as good for wildlife. So I tend to recommend warmer coloured lighting as well. But yeah, that's sort of what my recommendations would be and how I'm going to end it there. And I have a ton of acknowledgements on this project. There are very smart people working on these technical programs, and so I want to give a big shout out to those, and obviously Kyle Horton, who is my PI. So if you folks have any questions for me, I'll be happy to take them. I've got my email up there on my Twitter, so feel free to shoot me a message. Thanks again for letting me talk, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I'd be happy to have the conversation continue.
Thank you, Amy. So there is actually an applause button I'm going to push and see what happens. Yeah, there you go. So that's on everybody. That's on the left-hand side of your screen there. There we go. Some applause coming up from the audience, and a thumbs up. So yes, we do have time, and we actually have, I know because I recognize a few names, some guests from my neighborhood council area. And there's actually a wildlife motion that's been proposed that has some lighting restrictions in them. And this was an opportunity to learn a little bit about lighting. And I think I saw Bob Schlesinger raise his hand. Did you have a question, Bob? Do you want to unmute and go ahead?
I'm going to stop. Should I stop sharing? Does that make
sense?
Yeah,
going to have a light out. When is California going to have a light out plan?
That's a great question.
I know it probably has to be done in sections, but I'm sure there's a Senate bill that could handle it as well.
Well, we're working on it in LA County, I can tell you that.
Good.
Yeah, and that's a good transition. So we'll take Mindy in just a second. But is that Rod? Do you want to say a few words about that, Rod?
Yeah, hi. My name is Rod Kaufman. I'm the chairperson of the Los Angeles Astronomical Society's Light Pollution Control Committee, and we're spearheading an effort in partnering up with the Center of Biological Diversity as well as the Audubon Society in Los Angeles County to reinforce what is known as ROLD. That's the Rural Outdoor Lighting District Ordinance that was passed way back in 2011, 2012. Unfortunately, it hasn't been enforced, but we actually have an ordinance that could be quite effective and constructive, particularly in the rural areas, that will allow for a substantial reduction of light pollution in Los Angeles County, which is the largest county in the country. It covers a lot of territory, and we're hopeful that we're going to be able to expand that ordinance and improve it. And we've had a series of meetings with the local planning division, and we hope to present to the County Board of Supervisors in June a series of petitions that we've garnered signatures for, both from the LAAS as well as the Audubon Society and the Center of Biological Diversity. Among those proposals are a lights out feature for the county buildings that would hopefully parallel that in Philadelphia, Chicago, and in New York. So we're definitely moving in that direction, and we're gaining steam, and hopefully we'll be able to share that petition and the link on the LA County Audubon Society perhaps as early as tomorrow or within the week if we can do so.
Yeah.
That would substantially help our efforts.
Yeah, so I will actually be sending out a email to our whole list as a follow-up to this meeting, so and providing you all a link to that opportunity to sign the petition and do some action there. So, and I can also add that there is a bill that's being introduced at the state level in California for doing curfews on state buildings. So it wouldn't be all night, but it would be, I think they're trying to set a curfew time, and there's resistance to it, and we'll see if it gets through committee and out and whatnot, but there are people who are taking this up and trying to move it forward. So Mindy Mann, I saw that you had a question, and you're muted, so go ahead and unmute. It should be if you move your mouse around, it'll pop up and there'll be a red button that is to end the call, and then 2 to the left is the mute button. And everyone else who'd maybe like to say something can go look for the, let me see if that works.
One of the things, Travis, and I don't have that motion in front of me, but Senator Stern, I don't forget which, the state of California, is doing something about environmental land, and this may be a contact that maybe Rod, if he doesn't know who it is, he should possibly know who it is.
Yeah. Okay, I'll make that connection. Mindy, you are unmuted now, so go ahead.
I am? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes,
okay.
Loud and clear.
My question for Amy is, in the few places you mentioned, San Francisco, Cuomo, New York, and Chicago, a few places where you do already have something in place, how has it been in terms of enforcement, in terms of trickle down, as far as the population actually enforcing any kind of lights out or, any lights out? How has it worked? And what do you think has worked best in terms of getting the population to actually act on some kind of, turning the lights either down or out at night? And have you been involved in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So from a personal level, the Colorado Lights Out program only just got approved, so we haven't really seen that on the ground occur yet, and I haven't seen from a sort of residential person here, I haven't seen any information about it. So it's going to be interesting to see how that information is passed around to the local community. I think with legislation at the state level, I think a lot of that is affecting state buildings, and so I haven't been involved personally with that, but I imagine there is some process where they would have to install timers in the state buildings, right? I imagine there has to be.
A lot of state buildings have lights on 24/7.
Yeah, so when it's state level buildings, I imagine there is some kind of evidence that they would have to show, but honestly, I actually do not know how that is enforced. I don't know if other folks have been involved in that, but yeah, I think there is a difference between the state level legislation and the state buildings, and then voluntary lights out programs that we are seeing from Audubon. And yeah, I think you raise a good point. Like, what is the how is that going to be monitored and made sure that compliance occurs? Because what can also happen is that these get attention for a number of years, for a couple of years, and then attention dies down, and then sort of don't see that adoption of practices as much. But yeah, I have not been involved myself.
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering whether or not you'd heard anything about whether or not people were actually practicing in terms of what, like you said, either state level in buildings or people in terms of private homes. So yeah, that's always a concern. So I mean, it's great that it's at least happening, and I'm very excited about it. But that, of course, is the first step. So.
Mm-hmm.
So let me mention two
If I
things.
may, if I could comment, one of the things we've observed at the LAES with light pollution control ordinances is that they tend to be complaint driven. So if you see something, say something, and that might be addressed at the local level, either the county level through a representative, a board of supervisor, and so forth. But generally, there needs to be some type of verbal interaction, or needs to be some type of notification, and then an action may occur even though it may be delayed for some time. I know in Tucson and in Pima County in Arizona, they'll act on a light pollution control complaint reportedly within 3 days, which is quite effective and quite prompt. In LA County in the past, it's taken several weeks to a couple of months to act on a light pollution control complaint, from my experience. So it varies from region to region. But again, it takes initiative on the part of the citizen to go forth and report something. You see something, you say something. That old adage that you hear in different arenas applies to this particular problem as well. So really, it's incumbent upon us to kind of carry the issue forward when we recognize it. And that's something we also want to address in our ordinance. We'd like to have an inclusion, which we've met a favorable response from the county, and that the ordinance notifications occur in the annual property tax bills. So all landowners are notified uniformly when they get their tax bills, and they will have this notification under the special instructions on the tax bill that they will actually read when they look at their bill. So everybody will be informed uniformly at the same time. And we've met positive response for that idea from the planning division of LA County. So hopefully we'll get the word out too, and that's always going to help. That's really getting that word out is very, very important.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Amy, if I have an additional follow-up question on the impact of light pollution on bird species. With increasing light pollution, do you see this as a potential extinction event factor for certain populations of birds? Is that possible to project?
I couldn't say right now based on my research, but the work that I'm involved in, we are looking to merge the data with eBird data to address the species level responses. And so in being able to parse out the species level responses, who knows what we could see. I think at this initial pass, we're trying to look at spatial patterns and identify sort of hotspots of light pollution areas and areas that need attention and sort of conservation attention. I would I would see how my data goes with the combining it with the eBird data before I would like to make an inference on extinction at the population or species level. Yeah, couldn't say at this time, but we know population declines are definitely occurring. So, and the link to bird collisions is very much a direct mortality event, that there is scientific evidence that brightly lit buildings can draw birds in and then actually create mortalities. So yeah, I wouldn't like to say I don't have evidence of extinction, but it's definitely possible. It is possible.
Thank you.
Travis, would you have anything to add to that?
You know, so I've looked at this question relative to attraction to communication towers and trying to parse out the number of birds killed at communication towers relative to population sizes. And what I'll say on this topic is that there are some species that are particularly vulnerable to attraction by lights and then die either but in communication towers as they run into the big guy wires that hold them up, because we're talking about things that are 1,000, sometimes 2,000 feet tall, the FM radio towers, television AM radio towers, and or they are attracted to cities and buildings and run into glass, right, which is the sort of the compounding effect of, you know, once they're attracted to the city, what's there? Well, a lot of dangers to them. And but some species are particularly vulnerable to this light attraction piece, and the numbers that we calculated are conceivably a significant proportion of annual productivity. So we don't have the smoking gun to say that this thing caused this decline, but attraction to lights and mortality associated with human structures during migration is definitely one of the things that's led to this, 40-year massive decline in the number of birds in North America. So, Shani, I was just going to say that, Shani, if you want to chime in about the California legislation, you're certainly welcome to do that. Just noticing some names on the attendance list here.
Oh, great. Yeah. One thing I would just add to that as well is the birds, the passerines, so the songbirds that are migrating at night as well. Those are the species that I'm detecting as they take off at sunset for their nightly migration. Those are the species that are of concern here. So, yeah.
So I'm Shani Kleinhaus. I'm with Santa Clara Valley Audubon, and I see some of the people that I recommended attending are here. The bill that was introduced in the California Assembly is by a young Assemblyman, Alex Lee. It only addresses at this time property, state properties, and it really only talks about outdoor lighting. And it asks for any buildings or replacement of fixtures moving forward after next year to be fully shielded and to be turned off or dimmed or have a motion sensor that activates them after 11 p.m. So that's a step forward. Initially he was looking at the entire state, and there was a lot more in it. And after you got a lot of resistance, it kept shrinking. We're still hoping to be able to later amend it and add correlated color temperature. And his office seems open to it, but they don't think it's the right time to introduce that amendment now. Anyway, anyone wants to write, any organization that wants to write a letter of support, Travis, maybe you can send my email and people can, anyone who wants to write a letter of support, any organization, any Audubon chapter, I'll send the example that they sent us, and you're welcome to help us move it forward. It's not easy, but anyway.
Thank you.
Maybe AB 2382.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Okay, 2382. Maybe we'll coordinate on the message I send out tomorrow to the mailing list.
Okay,
so that people will have a whole light pollution action theme. Um,
thank you.
it might maybe it'll be Friday. Great. So is there anyone else who'd like to ask questions, has questions, burning desire, things you're afraid to ask about bird migration and lights?
You can also always email or tweet as well. I've got to say, this is so positive seeing the action and the bills that are coming through. I couldn't see a Lights Out program in Audubon, LA, so I could only see one for
Right.
San Francisco. But this is so fantastic. Yeah, I think it's groups like this that create the momentum and the energy to move things forward and get things passed. So this is so great to hear.
Paul, go ahead. You can unmute.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Just a brief comment that I was pleased a year or so ago or more to kind of go around the corner and look down from the Verdugo Hills area and find that there is one town there that seems to have taken reducing upward lighting very seriously. I don't know if you've noticed. I can't remember the name of the town. It's northeast of Glendale, I guess.
That's great.
Yeah, I
Anyone
think
else?
we haven't talked much about street lighting, but you make a really good point, Paul. Like the positioning of street lighting is such a, I think, an active area of research, but B could really make a difference as well. Yeah.
Amy, a quick question, if I may. You find that the blue spectrum is most harmful. Is that correct? Clarify that point. Yeah, that's apparently the same finding that the American Medical Association alluded to in their position statement on the effects of light pollution on human health. They noted that the blue LED lighting was most harmful for potential risk factors for various types of cancer, particularly breast cancer in females. So, it's interesting to me that you're finding that same harmful effect of the blue portion of the spectrum on bird patterns and bird behavior and so forth. So, I think, it's interesting. There's that cross,
Absolutely.
basically that same understanding in humans as well as in other species where the impact is severe. Unfortunately, much of the LED lighting is in that blue portion of the spectrum, and that's what we see, but it emits across the entire visible part of the spectrum. Previous street lighting has been more unidirectional, mercury vapor, sodium vapor, high and low pressure. Those have occupied specific wavelengths within the or bands within the spectrum. They can be filtered out by astronomers, for example. I mean, there are mitigation effects you can implement, but with LED, it's pretty much across the spectrum, and that can be a real issue for humans as well as birds that we're seeing now, as well as scientific endeavors for astronomy and so forth. So yeah, it's a real problem, and that needs to be addressed within the I think the Public Works Department, for example. I don't know how much influence these information bulletins from the AMA and so forth have, but perhaps it's a matter of making more people informed, and we hope to do that through our organization. So interesting that you're finding the same effect though with the blue portion of the spectrum.
Yeah, so the consensus is, like you said, blue LED lights is bad, and then warmer colors and more sort of on the red, orange side of the spectrum is good. It gets a little bit complicated when you try and pass out effects of green versus red. So studies with different bat species have seen different results across species, and then if you look at insects as well. I would say it's quite clear that red is definitely better than blue, and so some colleagues of mine at the National Park Service have actually been looking at this from a obviously in the national parks you have this sort of coexistence of the visitors and the monuments and the car park spaces, as well as trying to lower the impact on that wildlife, that the natural area. And they've actually rolled out a study to look at they switched out lights in a car park. I forget which national monument it was, but they trialed replacing the light with red light, and so they're doing some wildlife monitoring to see what the effects are on the wildlife there, and they're also doing some social science and surveying visitors and seeing if that has any effect on the visitor experience. And to date, it hasn't. I think the preliminary results are showing that visitors are not perturbed by this red light at all, and that's been really interesting, I think, for the Park Service. And then as us thinking about whether we can adopt that for streets in general. I think that's a really interesting element of the light pollution research world. Yeah.
That's great news. Red lighting for astronomy is very useful. It maintains our night vision and doesn't disturb our imaging and other techniques we use in our scopes and for observation. So, yeah, I'm very pleased to hear that. I hope that it bears fruit. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one way to make the astronomers happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. The visitors, so much of the National Park Service is about the dark skies and preserving them, and so many visitors are going to look at stargazing and the sort of star visitors, and so yes, that's definitely an aspect that I think has come into play with that study as well. Yeah.
Right. Well, good. I think we should wrap it up now, and thank everyone for attending, and thank Amy especially for a really interesting presentation and the work that she's doing. And if you want to get the follow-up email, make sure that you've subscribed to the LA Audubon list on our website, and I'll be following up here in the next couple of days about some things that you can do around light pollution. And Amy's open to follow-up questions, and as am I, because this is a pet topic of mine as well. So thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure tonight, and look on our schedule. Next month, we're actually going to have Ryan Terrell, who's a postdoc at Occidental College, talking about Bear Divide. And Bear Divide is one of the spots where we have some of those migrants coming over the local mountains, where you can go up and see them in the hundreds or thousands coming through Mountain Pass up out of the LA Basin. So he's going to talk a little bit about that observation site and some of the work that's going on there to just document the numbers of birds that are coming through and their species and characteristics, and get people out to see them. So that'll be very relevant to this whole migratory topic here as well. So thank you, everybody, and those of you on Facebook, thanks for joining us. We're going to end the broadcast now. Have a great month.